Hello everyone, Christina Werner here. Welcome to another video for SimonsStamp.com. In today's video, I'm going to be using the Yarn Love stamp set as well as the coordinating dies to create 4 different cards. Now these images on the stamp set are outlined images, so you would think you need to do lots of fun coloring on the images to finish your card. However, in today's card ideas, I'm going to leave these images completely black and white, and I'm going to let my watercolor backgrounds take center stage. The first thing I'm doing is stamping each of these images in some black ink. Now, this is VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and it is waterproof ink. But like I said, I'm not going to be coloring these images today. I just chose this black ink because it gives me a nice, crisp black line, and it looks great on all my projects. So after I had these images stamped, I then used the coordinating images. Now, the dies for this stamp set are actually split into 2 different die sets. You have the words and you also have the images. So if you purchase the stamp set and you want the images to have dies, go ahead and buy the image dies. But if you don't want that set, you could get the words or you can get both. I'm going to be using some Strathmore Bristol paper for my backgrounds today. Bristol paper is great for water mediums, so it's great for with your watercolor markers or Caron markers, even your Tombow markers, but it's also really great just for everyday watercolor techniques. So I'm going to be using this Bristol paper to do some watercolor or water techniques with Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated inks. I'm starting with the color Cozy, and I've smushed it down onto a slick surface. This is a palette from Art Impressions. And then I've wet my surface with a spray bottle, and I'm going to pick up the ink with a wet brush. I'm using a size 14 Zen brush from Royal and Langnickel, but any really big brush would do. And I'm bringing it over to my project and really getting that color spread all the way around on my background. So each one of these backgrounds, I'm doing 4 today, each one is mostly one color. This first background is entirely one color when it comes to the painting. I'm only using the color Cozy, and it works really great. I'm smushing that ink pad onto an acrylic block and then using a paintbrush to swipe off and put some paint splatter onto my background as well. So I first did one layer and I dried it. Then I painted another layer, just squiggles and things like that to get a texture. Dried that, put some paint splatter, and then I dried it once again. Now I'm going to set this background aside and I'll come back to it in a bit. I'm now going to do a different technique using the color Sweets, and I'm smushing that down onto a larger slick surface. This is the replacement mat for the Tim Holtz glass media mat. I've spritzed it with lots of water to get that ink really fluid, and then I'm pressing my Bristol paper directly down into that puddle of ink. Then I'm going to lift up the paper, and I have a nice coating of this color over my Bristol paper. I'm going to dry this, and then to add texture over this entire background, I'm going to pounce it back into those puddles of paint, or ink, I should say. And this is going to add a really fun texture and kind of water look to this background. Now, this ink smushing technique is one that I've done in the past with Tim Holtz Distress Inks, and I love Distress Inks for this technique. And Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated inks also have that same water reactive property that Distress inks have. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and try this ink smushing with the Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated inks. So here we are. Now, I do want to warn you that this technique won't work the same as Distress inks when you use the original Simon inks. Those inks behave just a little bit differently with water. In fact, those inks, once they're dry, they are waterproof. So you really can't do a technique exactly like this with the original Simon Says Stamp inks, but these positively saturated inks are perfect for water techniques like this. So that last thing I did was I put some water into the palm of my hand and sprinkled that onto my background and then dried it with a paper towel. And that almost bleaches the color. Because these inks are water reactive, after they're dry, you can add water on top and they still react to the water. So it's a great way to get additional kind of texture and break up any large solid areas. I'm now going to do the same thing, but with two different colors of ink. I'm now using Lemonade and Cadet, and I've smushed them onto my slick surface here, just in a random fashion, spritzing that with my water bottle. And then I'm going to do exactly the same thing I did on the previous background, smushing my Bristol paper down into those puddles of ink. But now, because I've used two different colors of ink, I'm going to get a third color. So I used blue and yellow, so now I'm getting a green shade. And as I move along and work on this background, I'm going to pounce back into the puddles of ink and add lots of texture. And this background is going to become more and more green and add lots of darker blue areas, things like that. And as I swipe it through the puddles, I get some cool textures, a little bit of movement going through the center of my background. I think it looks so cool and very abstract. It's really great for making backgrounds like this. This would be a really fun kind of thing to do in an afternoon. Just make a ton of these backgrounds and then make them into cards in the future. So I'm going to dry this and then I'll just continue on by adding more and more texture. So I'll dry that and then I'm going to do the water in my palm technique once again so that I can sort of get those bleached water droplet textures. I'm going to put my paper towel over the top and then put my palm down and pick it up. And doesn't that look so cool? I love that water droplet look that it gives. Okay, so this background is pretty much done. I'm going to set it aside and I'm going to work on my last background for today. Again, I'm going to use two colors. This time I'm using the colors violet and then I'm using sweet. This is that same pink magenta shade that I used before. But because I'm adding violet into the mix, it's going to give me a completely different look. When I lift this up, I get a really, really soft blended background between the pink and the purple. And if you wanted to stop here, you definitely could, and you would have a very soft look. But I wanted much more texture on my backgrounds today. So after drying it, I pounced it back into those puddles of ink once again. And you could stop here as well with just a little bit of texture, but I can't help myself and I had to keep going. So after I have enough texture over that whole surface, I'm going to hit it with my heat tool once again to speed dry this. And then I wanted even more purple. So I've cleaned up my surface and now I'm only going to use the color violet. So I've smushed more violet ink onto my surface, spritz that with water, and then I'm pouncing my background back into that purple shade. This is going to give me even more purple going across this background. So this background is going to almost look more monochromatic, mostly purple with hints of pink. I think it looks really, really neat like this. Now it does have lots of kind of larger areas without much texture. So I am planning to do some water droplets on this background as well. So I spritz some water into the palm of my hand and then sprinkled that onto the background. I'll grab a paper towel and put that down over the top, and that will pick up those water droplets and it will leave behind a really, really cool texture. Now, I wanted to add even more texture, so I'm taking some gouache and diluting it with some water, and then using a fan brush and running it off the edge of this block to get some paint splatter. I feel like I have a little bit more control over where the splatter's going by using an acrylic block like this. And I did the same exact paint splatter with my pink background. And then I'm going to set that aside and I'm going to do more paint splatter on my tan background, but I'm switching up the type of paint. I'm using some Fine Tech pearlescent paint And there are these fun colors that are more earth tones. So I've got like a brown and a copper. And I'm going to do a brown shade and also the copper shade and run that paintbrush off the edge of an acrylic block to get the paint splatters. And this is going to add just a little bit more interest to this tan background. It was looking a little bit anemic and didn't have much color. So this really brings it back to life. So after my backgrounds were dry, I cut them down to smaller pieces to go on my card fronts. And then I assembled each card really roughly inside my Misty stamping platform so that I could stamp my greeting directly on the card base. So I used a transparency grid sheet to help get my greetings aligned just right, and then close the door of my Misty to transfer the stamp to the door. I then removed the transparency grid and everything else on my card base and then stamped the greeting in that same black ink that I used for the images. So each one of these card designs is a little bit different. So I've cut down the really colorful backgrounds to be slightly larger or slightly smaller, really thin strips across the bottom, or even more of a square shape. And this just gives each one a little bit of a different look. Now, this greeting for this particular card says, sending you some cake for your birthday. I'm not sure if you guys know this. You might if you are a yarn enthusiast or if you have someone in your life who loves to crochet or knit. But the image of that like kind of bundle of yarn that is a little bit short and squatty, those are called cakes, yarn cakes. So this greeting goes perfectly with that image. So I've stamped all my greetings and now I'm assembling my cards. I adhered each one of the colorful backgrounds to the card bases with some foam adhesive. And I also used some foam adhesive behind my stamped and die cut images. So this gives just a little bit of sturdiness to the card. And for such simple cards, it gives a little bit more interest because those images are popped up and it gives it some dimension. So by keeping my images black and white and not coloring them, it really lets those backgrounds shine. I think it's a really fun juxtaposition to have a colorful background and non-colorful images. I think it looks really, really neat. I hope this gives you an idea of something to do with all of your positively saturated inks from Simon Says Stamp. Break those out and do some water backgrounds. These inks are perfect for water techniques, and they're a lot of fun to work with. All of the supplies that I've used for my cards today are listed down below, including the specific ink colors, the stamp set, and both die sets. Thanks so much for watching today. I will see you guys in another video very soon.